Good evening. Thanks for joining our AeHIN Hour, or bi-monthly webinar series where we feature topics on health information systems and information technology for civil registration and civil statistics. Tonight is the first of the monthly country e-health updates coming your way, starting with the Philippines. Our webinars are recorded via WebEx and will be made accessible after the platform to participate in the email feedback. For users to WebEx Event Center, if you're having troubles joining, log out the session and rejoin through the link sent to you by WebEx, or our meeting room number 868-425-277 and password is Manila123. Your mic is around the meeting, but you can chat your thoughts to us through the chat. Just kindly type them in the Q&A tab. You will survey after this session, kindly answer so we can give you the material of the session. Tonight is Dr. Alvin Marcelo, newly appointed AeHIN Executive Director. He is General and Trauma Surgeon by training, and he took his postdoctoral fellowship in medical informatics at the National Library of Medicine in Maryland. Dr. is certified in PGEIT, TOGAF, and Schmidt. We will now call on Dr. Alvin Marcelo.
And good evening, everyone. Good morning to some of you. I can see on the call, and all colleagues such as Esther and Roshan, Dr. Shinji, Dr. Phil. Thank you very much tonight. I hope that we can at the last every month where we plan to speak about e-health happening also in other countries. And to moderate, I decided to be the first one to present tonight, but I expect Dr. Roshan and Dr. Vajira later on to do the same for Sri Lanka. All right, I can see that we do have there's a Peter Go on the call. Probably get bored from the slides because she's seen them quite. But I figured my slides also to be simple enough and relative to an intelligence, because our ultimate goal is to learn. And so for country e-health updates, I'm presenting it for the Philippines on behalf of the National e-health Steering Committee, the National e-health Technical Working Group, which is chaired by Direct Pinita Valdez of the Department of Health. So, Professor of Surgery at the university, also currently Director of the Technology Transfer and Business Development Office. So I'm now taking care of the intellectual property of the university. That I am now the Executive Director of the Asia eHealth Information Network. We recently been registered as a not-for-profit organization in Hong Kong, and Dr. Bunjay ascended to chairmanship, and I took on the role of Executive Director. But in the subsequent webinars, I'm a member of the National eHealth Technical Group. I will show you later on in terms of the organizational structure. And in that National eHealth Technical Working Group, I was fortunate enough to be assigned the chair of eHealth Risk Management Expert Group. The slides you're going to see are mostly my perspectives on Philippine eHealth has unfolded. Based on policy documents and proceedings of meetings are my slides, but where I think my thesis has been subjective, I will make sure to highlight them. So, the story for the Philippines as far back as February 2012, when the organization and the International Telecommunications Union invited country representatives to Geneva. So we to send from the Department of Health, Ms. Gona, and the Department of Science and Technology. And together, they got the primer on the WHO ITU National eHealth Strategy Toolkit. And personally, and again, this is my personal opinion, I think this was a groundbreaking event because right up there in Geneva, WHO and ITU basically decided to send the right message to all the governments that we need together to get e-health done right. And on the WHO, AT under EU for it to make health is done right. So I thought that was one of the more messages that came out of that February 2012 event. He and Mr. Consulta went back home and looking at the toolkit, which you can download from the WHO website. Did that it was on uh, to write the health strategic framework and plan. It's they work together. Of course, Miss Jovi harder than more than anybody else. So she represented the health sector and basically came up with Philippine eHealth strategic framework and plan. Now come out very soon. No, a few months later, August 2012, the Asia eHealth Information Network held its first general meeting in Bangkok. If February was the global launch in Geneva, then August 2012 was the regional launch of the WTU National eHealth Strategy Toolkit. Finally, the Philippine Health Strategic Framework and Plan was released. So the Department of Health and the Department of Science and Technology issue joint department memorandum on the eHealth governance structure and technical working group, focusing on the aspects of the strategic framework and plan. In that context, they also presented what they had crafted as the Philippine eHealth strategic framework and plan. And you look at the PeHSFP and WHO ITU toolkit, you can see the similarities. Their generic structure provided in the toolkit, clearly sector leadership at the top, so a multi-sectoral steering committee, which is further supported by a eHealth strategy team. And on the both sides are stakeholder reference and expert advisory groups and a stakeholder environment. So it's basically what you have as well. In more detail, health sector is at the top, the governance steering committee providing the oversight and accountability, and the health governance technical working group represents the health strategy team for the Philippines. And then not present in the toolkit is what I think one of the most important issues of the Philippines is the National eHealth Program Management Office. Group of young people who day by day making sure that everything that were agreed in the working group that were elected by the steering committee are documented and are followed through. This was one of the major things that have been missing in national eHealth programs around in Asia, and this I would recommend to other countries to invest on. Not a investment because you do need to get at least 3 to 5 people to hire right now. But I guarantee that once they are there and they are properly motivated and properly trained to do what they're supposed to do, the program will fly very, very quickly. So early on, the technical working group, knowing the committee are very busy ministers of health and ministers of ICT, request from the steering committee to implement their decisions and agreements if they were able to reach those agreements in consensus. And the steering committee approved, consensus was reached, for the technical working group to proceed with the implementation. With that, if consensus is not met, then they should elevate those issues to the steering committee in the meeting, or issue is very urgent, that they have the authority to call for an emergency meeting of the steering committee to resolve that. So that's our decision-making framework that more gave the technical working group a lot of leverage in terms of addressing the issue they will face. Earlier decisions of the technical working group that was reached in consensus was the health data standards expert group. The expert group was by the technical working group as a missing component that the WHO ITU toolkit mentioned standards, but the National eHealth Program didn't think about standards, so they decided good to create a health data standards expert group, and because they decided on it in consensus, uh, they then created a health data standards expert group composed of members from the Ministry of Health, the Ministry, private sector, academe, and non-government organizations. The Department of Health also raised issue about their existing applications that were being used by the hospitals for reasons of privacy. So the issue about privacy and sharing of personal health information, consensus, the National Health Governance Technical Working Group agreed to create the Health Data Security and Privacy Expert Group. Again, of public and private sector on the needs for safety and privacy in the health sector, especially that the national government had already released the Privacy Act of 2012. On consensus, the technical working group created the advisors group, which are composed of private sector representatives, Ms. Esther Go being one of them, the capacity building task force to take care of the workforce, and the medical record working group, a group of 6 electronic medical records already being used in the public sector early as January 13. And then on the side are other groups such as the risk management expert group, the clinical and business process group composed of the Department of Health and the Philippine Health Insurance Corporation, and technical IT working group of the Department of Health and the Philippine Health Insurance Corporation. Now, to note would be on the July 23, 2014 meeting of the committee, the TE had already designated as the Enterprise Architecture Board. And it comes to enterprise architecture oversight, the working group was delegated this task by the steering committee. October 2013, the National eHealth Steering Committee met for the first time, and the key decisions were as follows. WHO ITU framework, where workforce development was an important component, they decided to add University of the Philippines, Manila, and Commission on Higher Education to the steering committee. Then priorities for eHealth. They knew that there were too many things, too many health problems to solve, but that they would limit the eHealth program into 4. 1, reduce maternal deaths. 2, fill health coverage. 3, health facility enhancements. And 4, UE in all public health facilities. By these 4 priorities, the technical had clarity what levers to pull or push priorities set by the National eHealth Steering Committee. In that meeting, they formally approved the Philippine eHealth Strategic Framework and Plan. So it went from a draft to a formal plan on October 2013. If you compare side by side the ITU framework and the Philippine eHealth Strategic Framework and Plan, you can see that they're very, very similar. They more or less follow the same boxes. they more details in the Philippine eHealth Strategic Framework and Plan. So we have governance there, we have legislation, strat investment, infrastructure, human resources, standards, interoperability, and solutions. So as possible, the Philippine eHealth Strategic Framework and Plan extend what already there in the toolkit. It made for easier extension or easier detailing of the health strategy because we were starting from an international template provided for by the and ITU. I particularly like this vertical stack. At the bottom layer would be the infrastructure, which was carried off by the Department of Science and Technology. And infrastructure would be the standards for interoperability. And on the standards and interoperability are the services and applications that are that are compliant with the standards inside that infrastructure. So the tactical stack approach I thought was a very clear indication that these three components had a tendency to each other. And for all eHealth activities were halted because on November 7, 2013, Typhoon Haiyan makes fall in the Visayas region of the Philippines. So everything, including eHealth discussions, were put on hold. Interestingly, one of the biggest problems during Haiyan was information management. And so very quickly, by 29, 2014, a steering committee met again, realizing the complexity of the National Health Program to adopt an governance framework such as CODE 5 to guide multi-sector-led eHealth initiatives. So on the right, you can see the third processes of CODE 5 divided into two major domains. The governance domain, which is in the gray area, and the domain, which are in the blue area. To the Minister of Health at that time, he appreciated the fact that there was an order, confusing component an eHealth program. And he appreciated the fact that there was actually a scheme to map the complex components of the eHealth program. So it's easy for them to adopt an governance framework, and by so they basically activated the first crucial or process in COVID 5, which is ensure governance framework setting and maintenance. So on June 2014, the E committee decided to activate the IT governance framework for the National eHealth Program. 14, with assistance from AeHIN, WHO, and NORAD, 12 participants from the Philippines underwent certification on Foundation, and many of them got certified. So we have 11 certified 5 foundation people in the Philippines. Former Undersecretary Ted Hanabosa being one of them, and currently Senior President and Chief Information Officer of the Health, Jovi Aragona, as another one. So it really helped a lot in getting the COVID 5 framework into the National eHealth Program because we had higher ranking others from DOH, PhilHealth, DOST, even the Heart Center, KTI got cited in COVID 5, and that brought a number of people knowledgeable about COVID 5 in the sector. In 2014, another meeting of the eHealth Steering Committee, they approved the Philippine Health Information Exchange as the key project for interoperability. Elected the technical working group to start crafting the data sharing agreement for the Philippine Health Information Exchange. It was very challenging. The theory of health information exchange was time The open HIE architecture was already evident to the Philippine team, but evident was that data sharing was very difficult, and data sharing between government agencies is not a very natural thing. That's opinion, observation, in that government agencies have a structure regarding how they should manage their data with text of their internal structure, but was not a policy to craft. So why some data would then flow to another agency? For example, why a health data about members would go to DOH and vice versa. So although data sharing might have been the ideal, uh, but policies and structures uh, were not uh, conducive to come up with a data sharing agreement. So this took about 8 months before a data sharing agreement was reached between UH and PhilHealth.
Alvin,
Yes, Dr. Fazila?
sorry. You were just slides before,
Yep.
you were the COVID-5
Yes.
governance. But then the slide before, you also talk about the WHO toolkit and how another one more before. Yeah, this one.
Sorry.
Yeah, this one. So there's no governance here, is it? Why do you have to have COVID? I understand that.
Oh, there's here.
Yeah. So
Yes.
you have framework,
Yes.
and then why did you adopt COVID then? Is governance is also part of the WHO ITU?
Oh, yes.
Follow COVID?
Yes. The reason to adopt COVID was that we needed further detail on the governance part, what we already had in the Philippine eHealth Strategic Framework and Plan.
Okay.
Yes.
All right.
Plus that what you see on the right are actually the sub-elements, the Philippine version, and in the WHO ITU is very, very high level.
Right.
So the introduction of COVID-5 was an understanding that the complexity was orchestrate the multilateral and the multi-stakeholder environment. We Department of Health, Department of Science and Technology, and knew that the private sector had a role to play, team and the non-profit organizations. And you see on the right are mostly government right now.
Mm-hmm.
So by adopting the COVID-5 framework,
Right.
it also showed the need to extend to other stakeholders.
Okay. Thank you.
So, 14, come up with the difficulties with the data sharing in the Philippine Health Information Exchange. The steering committee directs the technical working group to comply with the Data Privacy Act. Sorry, this at least over here. Oh, there. With the Data Privacy Act of 2012. Came a little belatedly, in my opinion, was already there as early as August of 2012. But that's when the data sharing agreement and the difficulties that came with the data sharing agreement and the Data Privacy Act became manifest, because the agencies were basically citing the Privacy Act as reason why data sharing can easily done, because Data Privacy Act explicitly prohibits the sharing of personal health information within a certain set of conditions. The Data Privacy Act, the constraints, so to speak, the data agreement had to be custom to make sure that the Data Privacy Act was still valid. At the same time, data sharing was made possible. So, and in the 8 months, when the decision to come with the data sharing agreement, so with the compliance with the Data Privacy Act was given by the steering committee. Do you like pulling each other. It's like a tug of war. You want to data, but you also want to comply with the Data Privacy Act. Yes, all other countries in Asia might encounter the same problem. So, they already have a law. We're not yet at the law stage. We're just at the data sharing agreement stage. Later on in the open forum, we'd like to hear other experiences. Maybe Fazila and Derek and other participants can also share how they saw data sharing conundrum, so to speak.
In Win,
Yes, Dr. Fazila.
we also have the same problem.
Yes.
It's in act that you can share, and then by the same time you want continuity of care.
Yeah.
But
True.
what I'm trying to say is, can't we just use the clause that with consent you can share?
That we have. Basically, what we have.
We have
And
that also.
and the reason, and reason I won't name the agency, but one of the reasons they didn't get consent from the patients to share data.
Okay.
So whatever they had at the time was not shareable. Consent was only for the patient to give to not for PhilHealth to share it to AeHIN. That was one of the agreements was that from a certain point moving forward, then change the consent form and inform the member that the data will be exchanged within a certain context, such as the Philippine Health Information Exchange. I'll slide about later on.
But in the consent, can't you also have that your data can be shared for secondary purpose, but all de-identified? Can't you have that in the consent for purpose and so forth, but without identification?
That's possible. Yes. Those were not in the consent forms originally until this data sharing agreement was discussed.
Okay.
So after this was discussed and the privacy expert group formed about how to work with the Privacy Act, but so allow for data sharing for purposes of planning, came out with this administrative order for privacy in the Philippine Health Information Exchange. So this is one of the outputs of that structure. It's really a process that until there was the idea of an information exchange, you would not have thought of a data sharing agreement. And when you started to talk to the data sharing process, then the Act started to come in, and it's like the governance structure was reacting, but so in a good way because they were reacting rather than being stoic, being reactive at all. So that was good that there's a mechanism for countries, especially in the Philippines, to address those issues head on. Sure that they are thought about and solved at the committee level and then elevated at the policy level and then fed back as policy in that loop might be easy, but it might be difficult in some also. HIE architecture was all familiar to us at the Department of Health because as far back as 2013, right after the AeHIN general meeting in Manila, Derek Ritz, Paul Biondich, and Sean Granis stayed and presented the Open HIE architecture to the Department of Health. And, some of you are already familiar with the Open HIE. This is the of the Philippine Health Information Exchange, and there's similarities, if not almost the similar Open HIE architecture. Here, direct and showing this to the Department of Health that time. We've got leaps already because of that. So dates for the Philippines would be the deliberations and internal processes, the multi-stakeholder environment, the consultations, private, I heard that before you can come up with an administrative order, you need 3 public hearings in Luzon, Visayas, and Mindanao. These public opportunities for every public and private to to the draft administrator and give their comments. And then another 3 to 6 months after the 3 public hearings to integrate all comments and finally publish them in the newspaper. So this happened in January 29, 2016, when administrative order for the implementation of the Philippine Health Information Exchange came out. Really, on the same day, in another daily, the privacy guidelines for the implementation of the Philippine Health Information Exchange. A brilliant move of the technical working group, realizing that the first question when information exchange would be what are the boundaries of the information exchange and what are the rules that it. So documents are available on a website that I will show later on. Another of the eHealth governance structure and technical working group is our standards catalog, which of standard code sets, standards change management manual that describes how a group or individual perhaps with an idea for a standard not yet in the catalog could introduce that standard, and that standard will be escalated with a standards expert group and then to the technical working group and in promulgation by the National Health Steering Committee. So I thought that this work of standards expert group was also very important. It may said, well, we know we need standards, so here they are. But we know that we will need to evolve, and so therefore this evolution needs to have some system before it happens. So the standard catalog is in version 1, then the standard change management manual is in version 1.35. We plan to start introducing some standards to the catalog later on when AeHIN interoperability labs start consensus on what standards they might want to the health steering committees when the interoperability labs start implementation. Documents that I've shown are available at ehealth.doh.gov.ph. Charis and Christine, the secretariat from AeHIN Secretariat, extracting all of these publicly available documents and putting them on our HINX repository. So the other countries can refer to or policy frameworks from the Philippines. We have to get a lot from India and Sri Lanka and Hong Kong, and we look forward to other countries sharing their framework as well. There's no school for eHealth at national level. It's not big enough to accommodate all the eHealth focal points in of health. So it moves all the implementers in the different countries to help each other, and that's why AeHIN created. We could have that opportunity to come together, want to share experiences, best practice, lessons learned. And basically, after almost going to 4 years working on the National eHealth program in the Philippines, we do much more clearly that eHealth is very complex and no single sector can do it alone. It needs holders to collaborate under the leadership of the Ministry of Health. It also puts the Ministry of Health under a lot of pressure because it only works at pace of the leadership of the Ministry of health. And so that's why also AeHIN, what's great is to allow the leaders from the different ministries of health to help each other, uh, advise on what worked and what has not worked from their perspectives. But the officials of those ministries to this on their own. It's an information network to knowledge and resources. That IT governance frameworks like COVID-5 can help in managing this complexity. Um, Without a framework, it is easy to get lost. You even know where you are in the complex scheme of things. But with an IT governance, the stakeholders can refer to a guide as they belong. They can recalibrate and go back to the direction when they see that they are not going vector. We also covered that good governance is key to progress. And good governance can be very simple, as keeping meetings regular as scheduled and deciding together as a group. But we don't need a superman, in every committee. We don't need a genius in every working group. But clarity, with diligence, and we need regularity. We need participants. Those would be the components of good governance. And I'm confident that if governments and ministries adopt those principles, they would move forward because our principles that have been important in getting as many mindsets involved in the thinking process of policy formulation. And consensus building may take longer because of more people compared to just a few people, but really more sustainable that way. Because of building the consensus, you're actually increasing stakeholder ownership of the health solution, which were its adoption. What like to happen is that we have this Philippine Health Information Exchange, and no one actually wants to use it because they were never part of its development. They were never consulted, or they were never informed about what it's supposed to do. Update in the Philippines right now. We are in the middle of our campaign period and would be getting a new set of office president to the ministries after June 30. And so maybe in a previous time, would be very afraid that all our e-health programs would go waste and would result into nothing because, the story of when leaders change, the whole thing change. The whole health program changes. But that has happened already to the Philippines. Our Secretary of Health, Secretary Ona, was replaced with Secretary Garin, and Secretary Garin continued the National Health Governance Structure and Technical Working Group. And the Technical Working Group has continued meeting regularly, deciding on consensus and addressing the needs of the National Health Program. So we can actually say that if you do have a good governance structure in leadership at the top level, it won't be prevented, but it will so ensure that with good governance, the National Health Program will continue. So, and I'll pass it on to Cha. Maybe we can have comments from our participants. Actually, mentioned for Dr. Fazila in Malaysia, and maybe Dr. Shinji, and then Derek, in that order. And then I'll ask questions after their comments. Thank you.
Alan?
Yes, Sir Fazila.
Thank you very much for a detailed presentation. Okay, governance and leadership will still play the biggest role when it comes to national e-health program.
Yeah.
But many of the e-health programs around the world is very much government-led.
Yes.
So, but I would hope that as more private sector and other stakeholders, you know. You may have the university, hospital, the academia, the defense coming into play. For Malaysia.
But within the leadership of the ministry,
Yes,
or
correct. It is still within. So in our health system transformation plan, we are looking back into the role of Ministry of Health, but I think we still have to play the leadership and regulator kind of role. Yeah. But concept building is really tough, Alvin. Even as simple as doing a national health data dictionary.
Yes.
It's really tough. Can you imagine doing a program, a health program? So how does Philippines address consensus building? How do you have the buy-in?
One of the challenges is if there were no legacy systems, I guess will be well placed by just telling everyone, okay, everyone, this is the National Health Data Dictionary, and when you start creating your applications, make sure that you use all the ends in the National Health Data Dictionary. But yes, we already have applications already out there in various stages of implementations, and I suppose the same with Malaysia and other countries where you have hospitals that are very sophisticated, really complex hospital information systems. In the Philippines, we have hospitals also mature systems, and all frontline clinics with very mature systems. Is how do we go back to the National Health Data Dictionary when we have a lot of semantics already added in our existing applications? And so that we were looking forward to the terminology service, Dr. Lana, as a way to solve problem. If you don't know if it really solved the problem, but as presented as a solution where every legacy application will own namespace in the terminology service, including the Ministry of Health, with in canonical namespace, and then each application will then be given the opportunity to map their terminology to the canonical MOH terminology. And the terminology service would then do the grunt work of taking the between the frontline and the ministry. It's all theory, but I direct.
Well, it's going to be very complex. Perhaps you can give some comment on that.
Direct your. Go ahead.
Okay. Regarding the comments for data sharing, I actually have two points that I'd like to make. I'll do them in reverse order so I can address your question about terminology mapping. Okay. You're taking exactly the right approach, and here are two really important points to note. One, the role of the HIE is to support care, to support some of the analytics necessary for health system management. And that distinction right there, when you're supporting continuity of care, the HIE's role is to provide interoperability for a subset of data which is needed to support the continuity of care, that which should be shared. And I'll give you an example from my country, from Canada. It's mandatory that the discharge summary, for example, posted to the HIE. But summary is a very small subset of all of the information that might have been collected about a subject of care while we're in hospital. So it put a little bit less strain on the terminology mapping job, because you are now constitute that information which is suitable for sharing, as opposed to having to be able to codify for interoperability purposes all the content that might be in an electronic medical record or an electronic patient record. That's that. The other point is that when you have constraints to that information, you tend to find more commonality. many of the systems, the electronic medical records and patient record systems, will employ some of the very common code sets for diagnoses or for procedures and so on. When starting, you do have that bootstrapping job of doing mapping between one and another set so that you get the interoperability. You also get, with adoption of the national specifications, that going forward, there will be a natural incentive for edge systems to adopt those medical code sets. And that can even be enforced as new systems are brought on to the HIE. It can be a hurdle that they have to get over, that they're able to send in messages to the HIE that conform to terminologies that have been set up.
Right.
So the other, and I'll make this brief, the comment that I want to make is regarding privacy.
Yep.
Issues around sharing agreements. And I said I was doing these things in reverse order because that's a predecessor. You do the mechanics of the sharing is to have a context, a policy context within which you can do it. And I'll use an example from Canada. This is an example that basically it can be applied anywhere. Important that you find what are the purposes of use and the data. And the reason this is important is it is reasonable to implied consent for care at a care facility. It's reasonable that there is implied consent that information about them will be shared for the purposes of providing them care. Anybody who's presenting for care should have a reasonable expectation that they're going to have patient-safe, quality care. And that expectation requires that you can share information about them because how you deliver patient-safe, high-quality care. That's actually one of the fundamental value propositions of an HIE. Implied consent for purposes of care delivery is you can quite, it's not a very highly charged policy. We had, when we were getting started in Canada, 9 of our 10 provinces went with implied consent, and the province went with a requirement for explicit consent. And with about 8 or 10 months, they walked away from that requirement that every subject of care would have to provide informed, explicit consent for sharing their information. Because logistics of capturing that
Right.
difficult.
So everyone went to implied consent.
Never to implied consent. And it's something that you really can operationalize, and it's something that will not be a backlash because it's such a reasonable posture.
It's limited.
So, sorry, right, implied consent meaning not explicit consent, isn't it?
Except that the act of presenting for care implies your consent for sharing. You can always withdraw that consent. No concept of privacy unless you enable somebody to withdraw that consent.
No, we did that also, you know. We did like consent, that you're coming to our setting, you are willing to share. But when the PDPA came about, the Act came about, we were advised by the lawyers to take individual explicit consent.
Advice.
Yeah. So you see, actually the process is tough to
Dr.
take.
Fazila,
Yeah.
was it a limited data set, or was it for any data that they were?
No, this is for the health information exchange, for the discharge summary.
Discharge summary. Wow. So exactly the same limited condition
Yeah.
in Canada did not work in Malaysia.
I can tell you that position is the one that our Canadian provinces took exactly that position. They had to walk away from it. They actually changed the legislation.
It's very tough, but I think within the Ministry of Health facilities, if it is going from one MOH facility to another, then it is okay. But when it's going from MOH to non-MOH, it has to be explicit consent.
Make more comment about policy and its usefulness for operationalizing an HIE. We actually had first of all, we've got national laws and legislations regarding privacy, but there was a specific piece of legislation that was brought into play in the province I live in Canada, which is Canada's largest province. They made a very useful distinction regarding health information privacy. And they made a distinction between a health information custodian and health information network provider. And to apply different requirements against health information custodians who are managers of databases that contain health information, as opposed to those whose responsibility it was to convey that information in points of care, to provide that continuity of care. It basically allowed network providers to within a policy framework that made it a doable job. Otherwise, there was just too much risk being spread to every participant when you wanted to be able to apply different policy constraints to the streams of health information than you did to the puddles of health information. Very useful distinction. So the idea of we call HINTs and HICs, a information custodian, a HIC, different policies applied to it, a health information network provider, a HINT.
Canada, okay.
Really, I wish I can bring you to Malaysia, you know.
Level of detail yet. I'm learning here. So, any other experiences? I see John and Dr. Shinji. I mean, how do you do this in Japan, Shinji? Do you have share data in Japan? Over.
Oh, can you hear me? Okay. No?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. So, Kimura, I already mentioned about H7SS mixed strategy is been propagating in over Japan, but it has performed to share some laboratory test or prescription record in these years, but it is only limited in data types or data datations. So we are trying to trace built up by OpenHL technology and in a lower and regional budget. So we need some more to correct how to and what for to data. That is important, but to convince government people, we need some much reason only to share, only to record healthcare documentation, such as public health or research, make drugs, innovation. Or,
Thank you, Shinji. We had Dr. Kimura talk about SS Mix HD, which I think is also a limited data set in Japan, HL7. So the Malaysia, we have Japan. Any other countries who wish to share this? We have Remdes and Esther Go in the session, so if they have anything to say from the private sector perspective, want to take the opportunity. John, you want to say something, John? Mon, you want to say something? Go ahead. Mon, you please introduce yourself. Mon, the microphone. Yeah, I can hear you. Please introduce yourself, Mon. Mon. Go ahead.
Okay, yeah, so I'm on to this, from this, and so I'm from the sector, and just curious if anyone has experience with healthcare providers participating in an HIE. I noticed here, at least in the Philippines, there's a strong among private hospitals of percent ownership. I think that's well, there yet in terms of trying to get them into the HIE as a potential be able to participating, at least as far as the private hospitals are concerned. So, I'm curious if anyone has any or insights about that.
Fazila, because Malaysia has a mix of public and private hospitals, whereas in Canada, I think you have a lot of public hospitals.
Yeah, I mean, we have a healthy private sector. Hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, but still we have failed to bring them into the HIE. Our barrier is actually the Private Facilities Act, which says that the data belongs to the patient and the hospital.
Yes.
So we are unable to do that. But between the public sector, it's fine. What we have done recently, we have done a syndication. We have called representatives of the private sector, the councils and so forth, and asking whether are they willing to share for the purpose of continuity of care. We got some positive feedback, but everyone is still telling to facilitate in looking back into the act. So we are working very hard with the legal advisor in trying to sort this out, and we can bring in the private sector into the picture. So we still have not found a solution yet. It's been going on for the last 2 years.
Private sector created the Malaysia HIX.
Oh yes, it was done much earlier.
The spirit behind it was privacy.
Privacy and confidentiality. And the spirit behind it was also, they're talking more of the manual record, I think. You know,
Okay.
that you cannot remove information out of hospital. So I think it was, at that time was more of manual. So, you know, it's an act. It's difficult. It's a huge barrier now.
Another act to actually
Correct. Yeah, but we are already moving towards health system transformation, which was the main agenda there is the public integration. So with that, and I'm sure there'll be a new act coming up. So that will actually facilitate us in information sharing.
What makes those 10 projects share discharge data, Derek? I mean, it's more work rather than no work.
This is a really written question because, I mean, the proportion of private and public care delivery varies country to country, but in a number of countries, it's most of the care is provided by the private sector. Our hospitals tend to be public, but almost all of primary care is private, and the care is a policy and legislative framework that establishes the primacy of patient care and continuity as the motivation for data sharing, and in that way it applies to all. I mean, if you're a private care provider or a public care provider, there are regulations that say when you're collecting information about Derek because you're providing care to Derek, on Derek's behalf, you will contribute to longitudinal health record for Derek. You are part of an arc of care. Even though for you, this is an episode, for just the arc of his story. So that kind of legislative posture can be readily applied to whether care is being provided in the public or private care delivery networks. I also think that some of the enforcement of this legislation is a challenge in some countries. We've fairly legislation in Canada that if somebody is not providing information on the part of the citizen, that some be brought to bear on someone that's hoarding data as opposed to sharing health data.
So the stick rather than a carrot.
Well, it's both. It's both the carrot and the stick. But it's interesting, once the citizen comes to the expectation that information about them will be shared within the care delivery network, that's a very powerful force. I mean, that's now a market force.
Right.
I'll contrast that against our neighbors to the south. In the United States, there's still a real genuine challenge that because of the way their health market operates, there's a reverse incentive to hoard data rather than share it, the customer data. They really do think of this, well, why would I share customer data with my competitors?
Right.
As the posture in Canada is, no, this is on behalf of the citizen. You are providing care and provide good care. You should be contributing to the care delivery network upstream and downstream of your.
So who calls that in Canada? That kind of philosophy.
That's about partly because we've got a single payor system.
Okay.
So there's a single payor system. There's now a helpful incentive on part of the payor,
right,
that whoever's providing the care, they're doing a good job on behalf of the beneficiary.
Okay. I said maple syrup.
It's all related to the maple syrup in some fashion, but yes.
But I mean, we're running out of time, but just one quick question. What's the level of granularity of HIE in Canada? Is it national? Is it regional? Is it provincial? Or even within facilities, they have some semblance of EHIEs? Over.
So each of the care delivery networks, they follow what is our the pattern of our federation, the legislation of our federation. So in Canada, provincial health is a provincial responsibility. Okay. Each province maintains an insurance plan, a public insurance plan, that funds the care that is provided to the citizens. But it all operates under a National Health Act. The National Health Act actually redistributes funds as needed, so that wealthier parts of the country have funds distributed to less wealthy parts of the country through the Canada Health Act, so that there is the ability of every care delivery network to provide the same services to the citizens. But the AEs tend to be provincial. Now, there are a number of the smaller provinces that have banded together and they share an HIE among them. Our 9 provinces are doing that. There's 3 or 4 of them that are sharing an HIE. But there's an expectation that those HIEs share information between each other, and that's quite immature. It's not real time. There tends to be a synchronization that happens through our national body, Canadian Institute for Health Information, CIHI, but in real time yet, and that's still to be. Our delivery networks have only, I think, in the last probably of years, got a degree of maturity in terms of how many of the providers have got electronic medical record systems. We've only recently got over the 80% mark.
Okay, thanks, Derek. I think the of privacy and data sharing are emerging themes even in AeHIN. So to address that information need, we do have our next content line will be my showing, but negotiating with Dr. Bunchay on what date he is available. We were hoping we can do this on a regular basis, but I think we just need to adjust to the availability.
Then after Thailand?
Before Thailand?
No, after Thailand.
Okay.
Because I'm trying to align it with our transformation plan should come out in April.
Okay. All right. Yes.
To come out.
Okay. So with Thailand followed by Malaysia, And I already have a list. Thank you very much, Dr. Fazila, for volunteering after Thailand. Be able to do one round in 2 years because we have 24 countries, the AeHIN list.
Also thinking if health information exchange is also one of a very important topic in our AeHIN, coming AeHIN, you know.
That should also be that come out in our visioning workshop in Bangkok.
We can have direct to come.
Yes.
Yeah.
So thank you very much, everyone, for joining us. I think there was a question here, but it was already addressed. If not, I will address this question by email. Thank you to the people who are coming in early, like John Carter and Derek Ritz. And we look forward to having you again in the next country meeting, country health update, Thailand, last week of March. Good evening, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye. See you, Bangkok. Thank you, Dr. Shinji. Thank you, John. Dr. Fatin.
Good night.
Good night.